This is Resonance 104.4 FM. Flipping marvellous. I'm Nick Hennegan, and welcome to Literary London, where we talk about things kind of literary and Londony most of the time. Not always, I have to say. We're also, again, beautifully in vision on bohemianbritain.com and also on YouTube and various other social platforms. So if you'd like to see us in our glory, and when I say us, I mean obviously me, and I'm very pleased to say I'm joined once again by the poet Cahal Dallat. I've said that right, haven't I, Cahal?
Yeah, perfect, Nick. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm always concerned about, yeah, pronunciations. And you're kind of a friend of the program. It's nice to have you on. Thanks very much for your
Yeah.
time
Lovely to be
today.
here.
And we're talking. I mean, obviously, regulars to Literary London and Bohemian Britain will know that your kind of thing, if I can say that, is W.B. Yeats, the poet W.B. Yeats, and you've got special connections to him. Um, but it's probably well, we're going to talk today about the Bedford Park Festival, and Bedford Park's not a place you will know if you don't know it, if that makes sense. But of course, lots of connections with W.B. Yeats, and there are a lot of events happening around West London. So just tell us what Bedford Park is, Cal.
Yes, I mean, it's if you know, you know, that's right. But if you've ever looked out of the window, if you're coming along on the Piccadilly line to Turnham Green Station and looked sort of towards town, you'll see there's a very wooded area, a green area with lots of lovely red brick houses. In fact, G.K. Chesterton talked about coming over the railway bridge there and seeing a rose red city half as old as time, which of course referred to Petra in the Middle East. But he was astonished by this place, and it was built by a Dublin-born man, Jonathan Carr, as a garden suburb, the first garden suburb. So his idea was that if you built really nice houses, and he was kind of part of the arts and crafts movement, you would get lots of lovely people coming there to form a community. He was lucky in that his brother Joseph Cummins Carr ran the Grosvenor Art Gallery, so he knew lots of artists who would like to live in these houses, many of which were going to have studios. It was radical because they weren't like London houses with a basement and a little area and attics for the servants. They were houses that had gardens, no basements, and they had a common area to cook a meal every day. So you didn't have to have live-in servants. It had its own stores. It was kind of the original 15-minute city because you could get everything you wanted in this area. And it created a great kind of revolution of thought, of art, of creativity, and so on. And of course, in like a shot was John Butler Yeats, who was a man who'd given up a law career in Ireland to move to London and become an artist. And his wife was not entirely happy about that, but he suddenly found himself in the company of all these other artists with whom they could sit. As you probably know, what artists do is, in fact, Bedford Park people were reported as going to the pub for a beer before lunchtime, which was scandalous in Victorian London, but they actually talked about art all the time. And the young W.B. Yeats grew up talking about art and about arts and crafts because William Morris was quite nearby, and the place was kind of built on William Morris principles, which are kind of going back to medieval crafts and so on. And so there's a great ferment. I won't talk about all of it, but it's 150 years ago. So it was founded in 1875, and its peak years, although it's still a beautiful and amazing place full of, if you like, artists and lots of families and a great community, but they're celebrating 150 years of Bedford Park. And so the whole year has been given over, apart from the festival and the book festival and all that, the whole year has been given over to really reflecting on what this place did because it created garden suburbs the world over. People rethought how you should build housing, not for profit, but for communal happiness. I mean, that was quite a radical thing for the very, shall I say, money grubbing Victorians, industrial, muscular Christianity, and everything was about survival of the fittest in Victorian age. And Bedford Park went, no, no, we're just going to chill out in this lovely green place. Yeats called it the greenest place in London. And he grew up here. Of course, it was just being built. So he grew up playing cowboys and Indians among the ladders and buckets and talking to all the Irish navvies who were working here. And his family moved here. Another Irish poet called John Todhunter, an Irish historian and dramatist called Henry Goddard Orpin. There was a kind of an Irish Home Rule movement. They were in favor of Indian independence, suffragettes, vegetarianism. It was like the 1970s, actually, but 100 years ahead of its time. And that's kind of what the Bedford Park Society are celebrating. So that's running through the whole year. So it's a very vibrant place. As I say, look out heading into town on the Piccadilly line, look down to your left before you hit Turnham Green Station, and you see this wonderful Queen Anne style village. And that's where so much of our modern ideas really were formed and were nurtured and fostered.
I was trying to work out the timeline as well, because being from Birmingham, of course, another big social housing venture was the Bourneville, of course, which was the Cadburys. They were Quakers. Cadbury's, the chocolate people, built a lot of very, very nice houses in the Bourneville area. No pubs, of course, because they were Quakers, which is
Well, I mean that's right, and part of their idea was not just that people shouldn't drink too much, so they would drink chocolate. Quakers were involved in all the kind of positive things like prison reform and so on, but housing reform absolutely, and building a community. Saltaire is the other one in Bradford. There's one in New Lanark, and there's one in Port Sunlight. And a number of Bedford Park people in the society are going off on a trip this September to visit all the, if you like, the suburbs that were built, or garden cities that were built. The one distinction about Bedford Park is that all those others, and as you pointed out, it was the Cadburys in that particular case, were built around a certain industrial drive. There was a factory somewhere, and they were doing what, if you like, Japan perfected later, and America finally caught on to, building a town for your people. Bedford Park wasn't built for a factory or a particular industry. It was built for people to get together and talk and write. You might say it was built for the artists and poets industry, but there's no factory here. Yeah.
No, no, just I'm very flattered as well. I've just actually been asked to host an event at the Chiswick Book Festival in September, which is I don't know why they've asked me. It's a chap who's Sam is now. I can't remember his surname. He's written a book called London's Lost Pubs. I don't know what.
Oh, wow. Well, you're the man to do it anyway.
I
Yeah.
can't think why
Uh,
they've asked me. I mean, I do run the London Literary Pub Crawl, I
you,
suppose,
you've
that goes every week.
probably you've probably found most of them in your time.
Yeah, well, it's
Yeah,
it's the artist in me, obviously, Cahal. That's the
yes,
writer in me. That's what draws me to the pub
of course.
quite a
No,
lot.
yeah, yeah. Good, good.
And of course, the Tabard, which is the Tabard Theatre of Tabard, that's also in Bedford Park as well. And in fact, we've just had a play of mine called A Ghost of a Chance, which ran there for 3 weeks. And we've got some more plans, and there's constant things going on there at the Tabard Theatre. So we've touched before about the Chiswick Book Festival, and we've spoken to Torrin Douglas about it. But
Yeah.
what can we look forward to during this 150th anniversary year? Because I mean, you're a Bedford Parkian, really, aren't you? In spite of the accent.
Well, I mean, within just talk about the festival for a minute, because there's Red Peppers by Noel Coward is on at the theatre at the Tabard, with along with Aged in Wood by Cian Griffin. So there's a theatre at the Tabard event there. All the sort of local entities, Arts Ed will be involved in Green Day. Arts Ed is the local theatre school, and they do a lot of stuff in the area.
And just
Green Day
explain Green
itself.
Day. Sorry, yes, just
Yeah,
explain
Green
Green Day.
Day. So the Bedford Park Festival. So it's kind of the highlight of the Bedford Park year. Started in 1967, at a time when people were becoming aware that modern building was sort of knocking down some of the older houses in Bedford Park, losing the character of the suburb. And they not only started a Bedford Park Society, which started off with a very worthy aim of not losing the green spaces, not having the lovely picket fences removed, not having houses modernized in an ugly way, so people still do development. But the society started off trying to hold on to that, and at the same time, the festival started up, and the idea there was to create a village green, exactly as any village in England would have had at a time. Of course, there's so much going on in Bedford Park that is rather more splendid than the average village green with a coconut shy. So what we have on green days, which is the Saturday and Sunday at the start of the festival, the 9th and 10th, that'll be. So Green Day has a fairground, stalls, lots of craft stalls, all the local organisations, the Bedford Park Society, the Theatre, the Tabard will have a stall there. And there's a marquee, there's a big band, there are kids singing, there's a rock group and so on. So the whole day, and then on the Sunday, in fact, there's an open air mass by St. Michael and All Angels run the festival. So there's a great celebration on Sunday, and then all the rest of the day is a village fair, if you like. And the whole festival starts on Friday evening with an exhibition of local artists. So that's open for everyone to come along to. And then there's a series of music concerts through the week, plays, talks. There's open gardens at the end of the festival, and of course, the place having been built where every house is like a suburban villa with a garden. So you've got some lovely gardens, and some people take really good care of them. So you'll find somebody's got a Japanese garden, somebody else has done something very Nordic. They're not all tied to the image of the English garden in the Queen Anne era, which is the kind of underlying arts and crafts theme. So and there's artists at home happening in the middle of that, so you can go to people's houses either to look at their garden or to look at and buy their paintings, and that's all open stuff. I mean, anybody who Googles Bedford Park Festival will see a whole rundown. And of course, within that, we can talk about the Yates Bedford Park project, which is kind of a subset of the whole Bedford Park enthusiasm. The only way I can describe it is a kind of a communal enthusiasm.
And of course, we've got that beautiful sculpture now in
Right.
Bedford Park, which we've talked about in the past, uh,
Yes.
which was Enwrought Light. What I
In wrought light. I mean, it comes from a Yeats poem in which Yeats, and many people will know this, he wishes for the cloths of heaven, had I the heavens embroidered cloths, enwrought with golden and silver light, the blue and the dim and the dark cloths of light, night and light and the half light. And it's kind of iconic in Bedford Park, the poem itself, because Bedford Park comes out of the arts and crafts movement. And Yeats's sister. So this is the family of John Butler Yeats, the painter, who's become a great character in Bedford Park. His son is becoming a poet. His two daughters get involved with William Morris in arts and crafts, go to the Chiswick School of Art. His youngest son, Jack, becomes Ireland's greatest modern painter, the first painter to sell paintings for over £1 million. Great friend of Samuel Beckett, the playwright, a great friend of Oskar Kokoschka in Austria. So he's a very modern painter. So you've got, I don't want to give this impression that Bedford Park is kind of frozen in aspic in a kind of a pseudo Queen Anne English village. All of this stuff is going on. Ireland's craft revolution owes its existence to those two sisters who took William Morris's ideas and their own and went back to Dublin and started Doneamer Guild and published broadsheets and tapestries and got involved in church design and stained glass windows and the whole world of Irish craft. Jack was his own man and became a famous modern painter. And Willie, of course, won the Nobel Prize for his for his poetry and his drama, founded the Abbey Theatre, and he effectively founded it right here in Bedford Park because George Bernard Shaw was a great mate, and his leading lady, Florence Farr, her sister lived in Bedford Park, so she sometimes lived there, sometimes lived in her own flat in Hammersmith. And she started doing performances at the little club that they had here and still have. It's now the London Buddhist Vihara. I'm sure you've been there, Nick, the day of our big celebration. So that became a theatre space. People were doing amateur drama, but of course they bring along Florence Farr as the great West End actress. Yeats heard her reading, and Yeats sort of won her over from Shaw, was interested in her doing modern social drama, and Yeats got her involved in his kind of more Irish, mythical, mysterious fairy dramas and so on. And out of that was his idea of an Irish National Theatre, which was the first public subsidized theatre in Europe, the Abbey Theatre, and the start of folk theatre. So when you go to watch Oklahoma, which came out of, if you like, People's Theatre in America, you're watching the end product of what happened here in Bedford Park. And George Bernard Shaw came along looking rather sniffily at these amateur dramatic performances, but finally admitted that the Irish cultural revival had started here in Bedford Park. So that's the kind of level of different directions Bedford Park took. So what we wanted to do was celebrate Yeats's presence here and the spirit of Bedford Park, not just a statue of the elder statesman W.B. Yeats as a senator or something, but something that sort of showed his the light, the creativity shooting up from this green place. And he has this great poem, of course, as I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's grey, he feels Ireland beating in the deep heart's core. So we went between the roadway and the pavement grey at the entrance to Bedford Park and put up this Yeatsian gyre, this great spiral that is created by Conrad Shawcross, the youngest Royal Academician, because I wanted it to be young and new and not tied to because Bedford Park has always changed.
yeah.
Things do change, you know. It'll never look exactly like it did in the 1890s. And so this completely modern gyre spinning up, and it's all reflecting gold and silver light, dim light, half light. exactly as in Yeats's poem, and as Rowan Williams said on the day of the unveiling, which you'll remember, Nick, because you did a great program on it, and he said that Conrad's work, in creating this artwork, was doing what all great art does, which was reflecting our lives back to us. You look up and you see a taxi or a London bus, you see people walking past the shops, and he said that's what Yeats's poetry does. It reflects our light, our lives back to us. And of course, Rowan should know because apart from being an archbishop, he's also a very recognized poet. And so that was a wonderful moment, I think, in which poetry and art and contemporary thought all came together. So yeah, you can't miss Bedford Park because there's this great dazzling spiral called in wrought light out in the park in front of it.
Yeah, it's a lovely, lovely thing, isn't it? I'm Nick Hennegan. This is Resonance 104.4 FM. It's literally London. We're also in Vision. Ha ha! Hello, look, I'm waving on bohemianbritain.com and on YouTube and various other social channels. I'm talking to the poet Cahal Dallat about the Bedford Park Festival. Bedford Park is, what would I suppose, it's Chiswick W4, isn't it? Bedford Park.
It is just
Yeah.
definitely, yeah, yeah.
And of course, you've been involved in all sorts of elements. There's a year at the year of celebration that we're talking about, but you've also got a specific poetry night arranged, haven't you? And are you still doing the walks?
Yes, both the poetry night and the walks have become standard fixtures. So we first did the poetry. Yeats's birthday happens to fall on the 13th of June. So every year we pick a night that's pretty close to Yeats's birthday. It's actually the 12th of June this year. And have a celebration of poetry. But it's not, and I keep making the point, the Bedford Park isn't just lost in this mists of time and we once had a great poet who lived here. It's about contemporary poets. So the theme this year, it won't surprise you after what I've just said, is night and the light and the half light. We took those lines of Yeats, and every year we take a line or two of Yeats's, but to actually see what contemporary poets are writing. So and what we have, you come along on Thursday evening, Thursday the 12th of June, 7:30, around that great artwork that Nick's just been talking about. And out on the lawn, we'll have music. I'll be there playing some classical and jazz accordion. There'll be drinks on the lawn. We go in at 8 o'clock, and the first half is people reading their own poems of light and shade, of darkness and sunlight, of sunlight and shadow. Light runs through practically every poet you can think of. Light is such a metaphor. So, and these are all London poets, many of them from Coffee House Poetry, who've come to our readings over the years at the Troubadour and so on. So that's the core group, but lots of local people. And in the second half, we have Christopher Reid, who many people will know as the author of The Song of Lunch, which the BBC adapted into a film with Alan Rickman and Emma Thompson. But he's actually been around many years at the centre of the poetry world in London, was poetry editor at Faber, who were the major poetry publisher. He also edited, and of course, the two great Nobel Prize winning poets in Britain. Oddly, the only people to have won Nobel Prize for literature who are poets and who were raised in Britain are W.B. Yeats and Seamus Heaney, both Irish. And Christopher has the distinction of having edited Seamus Heaney's letters, knowing Seamus because he was Seamus's editor at Faber. So Christopher will talk about his favourite selections of poetry, if you like, in the second half. So it's very much an evening for people who love poetry and people who want to hear somebody chat about their literary selections, a kind of a desert island discs of what he loves about poetry. So it's always been a fantastic evening. Recently we had Jeremy Vine, Marina Warner, we've had Imtiaz Darker, Yasmin Alibi Brown. It's not always a poet, it's somebody who has their own interest in poetry. And that's one of the things about the approach we take to culture here, really. Poetry evenings aren't just for poets, and musical evenings aren't just for musicians. You want poetry that reaches out to everybody. So it's always a fantastic sociable evening, and a great entertainment. So that's this Thursday. I shall have recovered sufficiently from that to do a 2.5 hour walk on Sunday, which again we've been doing for sort of the same length of time. So all of this sort of started back in 1999, and I've been doing these walks for years. And they try to tell the whole story, not just of Bedford Park, but of a kind of an energy in West London. If you're around Hammersmith at all, you'll know that William Morris was on the river there in his Kelmscott house. He had his other Kelmscott Manor up in Oxfordshire, the other end of that river, the source of the Thames, and he saw that as kind of the lifeblood of English art and craft. And in his Kelmscott house, he had He did his own weaving. His daughters were involved with embroidery. He printed his brilliant Kelmscott Chaucer. And Yeats, of course, became a frequent visitor there as a young man and met all sorts of people like Shaw and R.B. Cunningham Graham and Peter Kropotkin, the Russian anarchist, and Sergei Stepniak and Eleanor Marx. So you've got this great ferment. I mean, art and politics in the Victorian era were never really separate. And so we start at Ravenscourt Park, which is closer to Hammersmith. We go to Kelmscott House. We walk up from there, and you come to the island that inspired Yeats's poem, best known poem of exile in the world, The Lake Isle of Innisfree. And of course, everybody goes, "Oh, but I thought it was an island in Sligo." And of course, it was. But the young man here living in London, goes to this island in the Thames and thinks, that's just like the island in Sligo that I wanted to build a little cabin on with 9 bean rows and a hive for the honeybee. And so he rushes home to his home in Bedford Park, runs upstairs, writes the poem, rushes down to tell his sisters about it, and they go, yes, Willie, get on with something else. And it becomes the most famous poem in the world. But it also becomes a famous poem in a way because of the people he was hanging around with. One of his mates in Hammersmith was W.E. Henley, who was editor of the Observer magazine, and Henley published The Lake Isle of Innisfree in the Observer, and suddenly it becomes a really well-known poem. And so, without taking anything away from Yeats or the Yeats family, but one of the great strengths he had was he was in a community of artists. And that's what you see when our artists here open up their homes. That's what you see in open gardens, is that kind of interchange. Poets get nowhere unless they got a bunch of poet friends and reviewers, dare I say, to write about them in the Sunday papers. And when he started writing plays, he could call on people like Shaw and so on to get him into certain theatres. And it was through Shaw's leading actor, Florence Farr, that he actually got his first play. She commissioned his first play, effectively, which went on in the West End. So artists don't live in a vacuum. It takes a village, if you like, to create artists. And I think one of the messages from the whole Bedford Park experience, and particularly the Yeatses, is that it was a place where migrants could come and not only give something to the capital, which I think migrants always bring something of their own culture. They also benefit from the capital because it's got this as a kind of a crucible, a network, a hub of information and opportunities, and they also give something back to their own culture. And of course, Yeats fantastically gave back an Irish cultural revival, which was the soft diplomacy of Irish independence and flowing through from that to Indian independence. So art and politics are never separate, but they often operate in mysterious ways. And Bedford Park is a really great example of that. So the walk is 2.5 hour walk, takes us back up to all the places that Yeats, the theatre that his first plays were, where he was first inspired to write plays, the 2 different homes the family lived in at different times, because they, being artists, they frequently ran out of money, often had to go back to Ireland for a couple of years and stay with the granny, as lots of migrants have done over the years, and come back renewed and start into the art world again. So we go around the various Yeats houses and where Florence Farr used to be, and where John Todhunter was, and the art school and the church, which was very big part of the festival, of course, because it's organized around the church, but the artwork in the church feeds its way into so many of Yeats's poems. And we end up at In Wrought Light and really understanding the whole of that flourishing of art and poetry in the late Victorian era, which is the opposite to my mind of what Victorianism is about. Now, maybe I have a very narrow concept of dark, dank William Blake and dark Satanic Mills Victorianism, and Bedford Park is this absolute opposite of that, this village green and this lively community. And the whole of Bedford Park, and I should mention the Bedford Park Society's exhibition, which has brought together lots of different themes. Of course, my theme would be all about Yeats and the politics that was going on and the poetry and so on. But other people locally, local researchers, volunteers have focused on art and design, on interiors, on the community, on how Bedford Park kind of uniquely, in London, you couldn't go visiting people. You had to go and knock on their door and leave your visiting card, and they could either get back in touch with you. But if you hadn't been formally introduced, this was all a really big problem. In Bedford Park, people just popped round to each other's houses like they do in a normal village. And suddenly the middle classes were behaving like ordinary folks. And that was kind of one of the really big changes. And that exhibition has been pulled together by Nicholas Bueno de Mesquita, who has been a mainstay of the Bedford Park Society for many years. working with 10 different volunteers, of which I was just one. And that's on at Chiswick Auctions Gallery in Barleymow Passage, which is in a beautiful building designed by CFA Boise, who was one of the architects who built Bedford Park. And Barleymow Passage is on the Chiswick High Road, and that's on for the duration of the most of the festival from the 10th to the 20th. So anybody who's coming to Chiswick, do take some time out and see this story of Bedford Park, which is all about how it was designed as a community for communal happiness rather than for speculative profit, which is how most of Victorian Britain was built.
And there's still lessons there today, aren't there? All to
Yeah,
be had about
absolutely.
art and
Yes.
commerce and where. So we're talking about. Give me the dates again. Sorry.
Right. So the poetry evening is the festival is from the 6th to the 22nd of June, and that starts with tomorrow night, the art exhibition, and then Green Day on Saturday and Sunday, and the festival runs through to the 22nd. The exhibition is in Barleymow Passage on the Chiswick High Road from the 10th to the 20th of June. The poetry night is on the 12th of June. That's Thursday, coming up Thursday next, and the walk is on Sunday, the 15th of June at
Okay.
2:30.
And
And
is there a general catch-all email contact or what if people want
yeah,
to know specifically where should they go?
Google Bedford Park Festival.
Yeah, Bedford Park
That's it.
Festival.
Yeah, I guess it's www dot, yeah, that's the email. Sorry, www.bedfordparkfestival.org. So
.org.
as simple as that. But just Google Bedford Park Festival and you'll find it anyway. So and it's got divided into talks and walks and concerts, and you'll find all the stuff there.
Oh, that's brilliant. We were going to talk, I was going to talk about you and your poetry as well, but we've run out of time again, as often happens, but you'll have to come on.
We've talked again. It's always
Yeah.
great. It's always great to be on here and to get a chance to talk about what's going on in this particular part of literary London.
Yeah, it is. I think was it Torrin calls Chiswick or the most writerly place in London.
Absolutely. They've probably discovered about another 2 dozen writers who lived here since the last time you talked to Torrin in his book festival. So it's yeah, there's an awful lot has gone on, and really a lot going on here.
And
Yeah,
that's the nice thing. Yeah, it is still going on. So brilliant.
absolutely.
Cahal Dallat, thank you so much for your time
Thanks.
and
Yeah,
enthusiasm on Bedford Park Festival. So if you want to know anything, of course, then you can also email me. I've got a new email address now, nick at bohemianbritain.com, nick at bohemianbritain.com, or the old one still works, radio at mavericktheatre.co.uk, radio at mavericktheatre.co.uk. Thanks again for your time, Cahal. You can, as I say, see
thank
us
you.
on bohemianbritain.com. You can see us. I'm waving again. I'm waving. And you can hear us, of course. We'll be back next week with Literary London on Resonance 104.4 FM.